This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
It's really remarkable to be at the Kever of the Taz, Rabbi Dovid ben Shmuel Halevi, who lived from 1586 to 1667. He lived 81 years, which is quite a long lifetime for those days. And it's really a miracle that we were able to be here for a few moments. The Taz was a son-in-law and a student of the Bach. And it is said that by the time he was 7 years old, he already knew Baba Kama, Baba Matzian, Baba Basra thoroughly. He was also a student of his older brother. First, he was, in fact, a student of his older brother, Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi, who is the author of Shas Chuvas Mahari Halevi. And, in fact, when the Taz would send a shaila to his brother, so the Taz would sign his name, Dovid, the younger, son of Adoni, my master, my father. So Rabbi Yitzchak addressed him in the following way. Dovid is katan be'enav, but he's great in all other respects. Chassid va'anav, he's my master, my brother. Okay, so the Bach recognized his greatness, and he took him as a son-in-law. I once heard from Harav Victor Miller, that the way the shidduch was made is the Bach once commented to the Taz, my daughter is so beautiful, she's as beautiful as the moon. And whereupon Rabbeinu Dovid, the Taz said, in that case, I would like to be Mekadesh the Levana. Now the Pinei Yeshua has a haskama on the Sefer of the Taz, and he says that the psakim of the Taz, Kfar Nisparsmu Chiburai V'Hayra Oisav B'Chol Tfutzos Yisrael Ula Oiroi Anu Holchim Halacha Kamoisai B'Roiv HaMakoimos Haya Gadol Shabachroinim. He was the greatest of the Achroinim, Rishoin Shabarishoinim She'en Lemala Mimenu, the first of the early ones, nobody greater than him. Now, unfortunately, the Taz lived through a terrible Cossack uprising of 1648-1649, which destroyed over 700 Jewish communities, and the Taz suffered much hardship. He said 2 of his sons died in Krakow when they were young, and another 2, Reb Mordechai and Reb Shlomo, died al Kiddush Hashem by the Cossacks on the 8th day of Iyar in 1664 in Lemberg. Interesting, if you look in the Taz and Archaim, Siman Kuf Nun Aleph, he brings that in my youth I lived in Krakow, and my Beis Medrash was above the Beis HaKnesses, and the Taz says that I was punished for living on top of the Beis HaKnesses, that my sons died, and the Taz says he attributes it to that. Now, the Taz is most well known for his Perush on the Shulchan Aruch, most notably on Orach Chaim and Yeridea. On the other Chalakim, it was published after there were already a number of Noisei Kelim. Now the story goes that during the pogroms of 1648, the Taz fled to a fortress in the city of Alek, and the city came under siege for many days. The walls were breached, and the Yidden were engaged in tefillos and heart-rending prayers, and at one point the Taz was faint from fasting. He drowsed off, he was faint, and in a dream he heard the following words, V'ganoisi aloir ba'avur Dovid avdi, I will protect the city in the merit of my servant Dovid, referring to him, the Taz. And they were ancient, rusty guns which stood on the ramparts, had not been used in many years. They were not serviceable, and these guns suddenly became usable, and a great artillery barrage decimated the enemy camp and caused the enemy to flee. Another story, an amazing story, is recorded by none other than the Nefesh HaChaim and the Ruach Chaim on Perkei Avos, that a woman whose daughter who was deathly ill, came running to the Taz and said, Adonenu Dovid, save my daughter. So the Taz says, what do you want from me? Hasachas alekim anoichi. So she said, no, I'm asking of your Torah. I'm asking of your Torah. So the Taz says, indeed, I just studied a very difficult sugya, and I answered a question, and I will donate the zchus of my learning. And sure enough, the daughter snapped out of this feverish illness and was cured. Now, there's on another occasion, the it's reported that in the Sefer Avnei Shayam, that in the Pinkas of Lvov, we're here in Lvov, and that was the Taz's final Rabbanos, is brought that the daughter of a wealthy man became insane. A Ruach Ra entered her, and her father asked the Taz, please do me a favor, visit my daughter and pray for her. So finally he acceded and he came in, and when when the door was open for him, this girl who was possessed turns to the Taz and says, Baruch haba! And then she turns around. And the Taz says, why are you turning around? And she said, because the wicked cannot look at the tzaddikim. And she says to him, you should know, in the heavens, they call you Rabbeinu Hagoin Baal Turei Zahav. And the Taz says, well, in that case, if that is true, then I am goizer that you should have a refuah, because today I answered up a question on the tour, and I answered it Lamita Shel Torah, and that's chos you should have refuah shalema. And sure enough, the woman snapped out of it, and the Oishar asked the Taz that, he says to the Taz, I want to give you a matana. The Taz refused. So the Gevir went and he bought a talis, a beautiful talis for the Taz of Turkish wool. And the Taz would not wear it. He said, I want you to know, I'm an old man. I'm almost up to my final stage. And my old talis could testify that even one time in my life, I did not allow a foreign thought to enter my mind in the course of tefillah. Now the Taz was a contemporary and an associate of the Tzemach Tzedek of Krachmil and Reb Shimshon of Prague. And the Taz also wrote a very important work on Chumash, namely the Divrei Dovid on Rashi. Now, a few important things about the Taz on Shulchan Aruch. The Taz originally published his commentary, and the Shach, as is known, very often argues on the Taz. The Shach was much younger than the Taz, but the Shach says that when he met the Taz honored him very greatly and kissed him on the head and was so happy to see him. In the Hakdama of the Shach to the Nekudas HaKesem Yardea, the Mechaber says, don't think that I had some kind of personal issue with the Taz or I have animosity towards him. Because as Chazal tell us, as Vahev Besufa, that ultimately when Talmidei Chachamim argue, there's great love in the end. I actually hosted the Shach, says the Taz, and he stayed by me for 3 days. And I honored him, tremendous honor, lo yu'uman ki yisupar. And he honored me greatly, and he kissed me on the head, and he rejoiced with me like at a Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And the Shach says, you should know that I did not compose the Sefer for any other reason than for the MS of Torah. Now, the Taz started off in Krakow, where he learned in great poverty. And then he became the Rav in Patalich, which is a small town in eastern Galicia in Poland. And then he was a Rav in Rosh Hashiva in Ostro, where the Marsha had served. It's interesting that the Shach wrote Hagois on the Taz called Nekudas HaKesef, which the Taz himself never saw, but the Taz includes in an additional page at the end of the Taz, which seems to be in disagreement with the Shach, and the Shach responded to that in something called Kunshos Achroin. These became the two greatest Perushim on Archaim and Yeridea. The Taz never saw, as we mentioned, the Nekudas HaKesef, but the Taz's daughter's son, Rabbi Yoel ben Gad, wrote a response and a refutation to the entire Nekudas HaKesef. It's called Magine Zahav, where he defends his grandfather. Now, on the original Matzeva of the Taz, it's written, Ba'or Tairasai Heir L'Dardar, in the light of his Torah, it illuminates for generations and generations. Hein Be'oideni Chayim. Even when he was still alive, Kvar Zacha, he was Zaycha, Ki Nifsika, Kamoisei Halacha was like him, Hayra'asai shlema zak v'arucha. His psak is wholesome, pure, and organized. Says another great Rav in Lvov, Rabbi Yosef Shal Halevi Natanzan. He says 200 years when he served, when the Shalom Esha, Rabbi Yosef Shal Halevi Natanzan served as a Rav in Lvov. After the P'tir of the Taz, based on the government's command, they had to clear out the cemetery, and they opened up the Kever of the Taz, and they found his body was Shalem, and his shrouds were Shalem, and he was completely whole. He had been completely intact and not disintegrated, as Gedolim Tzadikim b'misasam yoser mibichayeyam. And what an amazing zechus of a lifetime it is to be in the vicinity of the Guf HaKadosh of Rabbeinu Dovid, Zechusa Yagin Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.